So, Morbius is the latest Marvel movie from Sony. It exists within the Venom universe, and I'll start off by saying this. Having a universe without Spider-Man and just the villains, I think, is an interesting idea. I think when you have just these types of characters occupying this world, it does tend to shift the focus. And I think you can actually make like a pretty decent universe out of that. Venom, I think, has a lot of potential, and I think that's mostly because Venom has a potential as an anti-hero because he has that there's that great dynamic between Eddie Brock and the symbiote. I really like them. It's like a little kind of like buddy cop duo. They work here. Morbius, however, just doesn't work, and I think it's because it feels like Morbius is trying to be like that kind of like classic Universal horror monster movie, and it really doesn't work here. And I think it's because there's almost like a hesitancy to make it either a horror film or a superhero film, and it kind of falls somewhere in the middle, and it just ends up being a whole lot of nothing. So the whole deal is that Jared Leto plays Dr. Michael Morbius, quite a name, and he has a rare blood disease that prevents him from basically having like mobility, and it's going to like hinder his life. So he's looking for a cure for this ailment. He's developed artificial blood, but it's apparently not enough. So he decides, like, hey, let's merge bat DNA with human DNA. And of course, when he does this, it transforms him into essentially a vampire. Like, he doesn't have the whole holy water and, I burn up in the light and all that. But he does crave blood. And he can transform into, having fangs, and he becomes more buff and agile, and he can kind of sort of fly with like this kind of like weird CGI smear around him. I'm not too sure how it works. But here's the thing. Okay, so Morbius is a guy who has spent his whole life kind of in crutches. He's been desperate, to be something, to find a cure. He spent his whole life being like, skinny and gangly and barely being able to, survive. And now he has this cure that turns him into this very buff and agile vampire with all these cool powers. Like, he can climb walls, he can fly, and he's got like these problems with his fangs and eating people and draining their blood. But if you went through that kind of transformation, like, think about this for a minute. If you went through that type of transformation, wouldn't you be excited? Wouldn't there be some thrill? Like, oh my god, I could never walk and jump like this. These are things that no other human could do. And his reaction is, oh man, I better document this. I gotta write it down, I gotta contain myself, and I gotta be careful about these powers. And now, in a sense, that might seem interesting as like, kind of somebody who's becoming a monster, who's kind of like seen monster movies and understands, more of the analytical process. But it's also really boring. It's incredibly boring, and it's mostly because, like, Jared Leto's performance, he just kind of, like, sleepwalks through this film. There's rarely a moment where you're interested in him as a character, where he actually has some charm. I mean, they try. There are a whole bunch of scenes where they try to show some extra level of emotion and humanity in him, and he's dead on the screen. Like, I mean, I could probably make some, like, pun about, vampires and all that, but it's just not that fun to watch. And it's supposed to be, and like, I was hoping then that because like his nemesis in the film is Milo, who is his childhood friend who has the same disease. He's played by Matt Smith, and he basically has the opposite reaction. He gets these powers, and he's like, oh, this is cool. Let's have fun with them. Of course, he goes too far, and he starts killing people, and that's when, they have to have this big showdown. But the thing is, like, Matt Smith can only do so much. Like, and again, it's not that they're not trying. There are, like, funny scenes with, like, Matt Smith where, I think one of my favorite scenes is when Matt Smith is just getting dressed for the night, and he's just doing push-ups and just ogling himself in the mirror. It's a ridiculous scene, and I don't think it works all that much, but it's at least some amount of charm, some charisma that's coming through the screen, because you're not getting it anywhere else. Like, Morbius' assistant is a lab assistant called Martine. She's played by Adria Arjona, and she has basically nothing to do. Nothing. She's just there to like assist him. She's trying to offer like, a offer up like a different perspective and say, hey, maybe you've gone too far and you might want to reconsider. And of course, Morbius will just ignore her. She will also be the love interest, but we don't really have time to develop their romance in here. And I can't help but feel like when I was watching this film, like it's under 2 hours, I kept feeling like there's something left on the cutting room floor. There's some scenes missing, because when they get to the end of the second act and Morbius and Martine share a kiss to show they're romantically involved, you don't buy it, because they really haven't spent that much time becoming like, very like intimate. Where it's kind of like, oh, okay, this feels more obligatory than it does like a relationship that developed. And I know that like a lot of Marvel films have kind of had this problem for a while, and all these issues are kind of like they're kind of blown up bigger here in Morbius. Like you can see a lot of the issues here with like a film that was it really does seem like it was diced up. And again, like another character who's kind of wasted here, you have Jared Harris playing a doctor to Milo, and he kind of like looked over Morbius as well. You kind of feel something for him, and like there's a great scene where like he confronts Milo and says like, dude, I understand you've done evil things, but I want to try to help you. And that scene kind of just goes nowhere. It kind of goes the route we expect it to. Matt Smith is going to betray him, and Jared Harris is going to become pathos. We get it. There's not much built on it, though. It feels kind of standard. In fact, the film really doesn't get interesting until like the very end. Like literally within like the last 10 seconds of the film, it actually becomes interesting. You're kind of like, oh, okay, like they actually do something with Martine. They have Morbius kind of come into his own. He has a bigger presence in the city. That's an interesting angle, and we only get like 10 seconds of it. Oh, another actor who's wasted, which I've heard a lot of people talking about, is Tyrese Gibson. Plays an FBI agent who just, he's the standard kind of cop character who's always one step behind the hero, or anti-hero in this case. And again, nothing to do here. Not like, and again, there are scenes where you can feel it trying, where they're trying to have some levity and some humanity and some humor to it, and they just don't work. Like the worst one, I think, is the interrogation scene between Tyrese Gibson's character Simon and Morbius, where they kind of joke about like vampirism, and they discuss like how Morbius is accused of a crime, and he's kind of like, I don't know, he kind of gives like a shrug, like, okay, maybe I did it, but I didn't mean to, so can you guys kind of let me off the hook? It's like, there's so much more you could do with these scenes, and it's not happening in this film. And the thing is, like as an anti-hero film, you're kind of hoping it will swing one way or the other. Is it going to make Morbius a full-blown villain, or is it going to turn him into a superhero? And that's a really hard dynamic if you're bouncing between like a horror film and a superhero film. Of course, by the third act, it's just, it's given up on becoming a horror. It just becomes the straight up familiar type of superhero film. You have a lot of like the dusty tropes of this genre now. Like you have a scene where Morbius and Milo are fighting each other, and by this point, when I say they're fighting each other, I mean like they're battling each other across the city. Like they're punching them through walls, they're smacking into buildings, and by that point, they're completely CGI characters, and they'll let you know that they're CGI characters by having that typical slow motion shot, like just before Morbius is about to punch Milo in this fast-paced fight. They'll slow down and go into slow motion before the punch goes in. Similar to what you've seen in films like Bloodshot and Venom and all these other films. Just as like, the shots are there to look cool, but it's also a reminder that you're not really watching two actors on the screen. You're watching a whole bunch of like computer animation, and they're showing it to you. Like, and there's nothing wrong with having like computer animation if you want to accomplish these big scenes. But it helps if you're more engaged with that world, then you can have like a little bit of a sense of believability. Like, yes, I'm not expecting Jared Leto and Matt Smith to be on wires hanging about fighting each other. That would be cool. But for these fast-paced scenes, I know that's not going to work for them. It doesn't help that they have like, for some reason, like their vampire characters have like this like smear of like, I guess, like atoms or something. I'm sure like somebody who's read the comics can correct me on that, but it looks bizarre and it doesn't really work here. It also doesn't help that a lot of their transformation effects, when they start getting the teeth and all that, like they start phasing in and out of that. But they're very much like computer graphics. And like if you do that like once or twice, I guess that'd be interesting, depending on how you shoot it. But there's also something lost there where you're watching a monster transformation where you're not seeing all of the character there, and it really hurts the film. Like it feels like it's struggling to be a monster movie, and it can't quite get there because it has to be a superhero film. Also, you know, the mid-credit this has got to be one of the weakest mid-credit sequences. And again, I think a lot of this goes into how it was directed and the performances. Like you have Jared Leto's Morbius at this point, embracing his powers, and then he realizes this world he occupies is not as small as he thinks, and that there's other villains that he could team up with. And the audience, I think, at that point is meant to get excited because they're like, oh man, there's going to be a Sinister Six movie. And Morbius's reaction is kind of like, oh, okay. Just kind of like a shrug, which kind of feels like Morbius's character through all this. It's like he's just rolling with the punches. Like he's not amused by anything. He's just, you know, he's deeply engaged in this film that is not the type of film that it's aiming for. And the thing is, if it looks like Leto's character doesn't really care about this world or his powers, then it begs the question, why do we need to? Why should we get excited that he can climb walls and has all these neat powers to fly, and he's not impressed by that? Like, are we supposed to look down on him? Are those scenes where where he can like punch through walls and stuff? Or are we just supposed to be like, oh man, poor Morbius, he has to endure this? Like, I know the film is leading it to that direction because it wants you to feel some sympathy for the monster, but we really don't see much of the issues of that monster. Like, yes, he kills people, but there's not a huge contemplation on how that affects him morally. Because, again, like, he's engaged in this very analytical mindset of, you know, I need to study this and I need to make this cure work somehow. And I can't help but feel that's the way that that Sony probably felt while they were making this film. They're just trying to make this type of villain story work, and sadly, it just doesn't. Like there's nothing. I felt like nothing out of this film. It just like Jared Leto's character at the end of this film, just a shrug for this world.